1947 Partition. There is a story that when Lord Mountbatten's task as Viceroy ended, when he had shared out the subcontinent between the Hindus and the Muslims, he remarked, I don't care what is said about my work in India during my lifetime. I care only what my grandchildren may say and think. This thought perhaps absolves contemporary chroniclers from deciding too readily whether the partition of India was a tragedy or a salvation. In this, his last battle of wits, Muhammad Ali Jinnah dealt with adversaries sharply different from himself in mind and character. Lord Mountbatten was an amalgam of minor royalty, cavalier, and valiant sailor. As Supreme Commander, Southeast Asia, he had enjoyed victory over the Japanese and he had become one of the heroic figures of the war. The wish to rule dies slowly in royal persons, and he might have been pleased by the prospect of his new appointment, of being entrusted with political power beyond that of his cousin on the throne. But Lord Mountbatten's ambitions are with the navy. He was reluctant to become viceroy, and any princely sensations he might have felt must have been tarnished by the knowledge that, while ruling India, his real task would be to divide it and give it away. The new viceroy arrived in Delhi on 22nd March 1947 with his staff and advisors, among them General Lord Ismay, a humanitarian who knew and loved India and who, when the killing began, sheltered 500 Muslims in his garden, and Sir Eric Mayville, also an authority on India and a wise mediator. 3 days later, when Lord Mountbatten received Pandit Nehru, he said, Mr. Nehru, I want you to regard me not as the last viceroy winding up the British Raj, but as the first to lead the way to a new India. Nehru answered, Now I know what they mean when they speak of your charm being so dangerous. Muhammad Ali Jinnah would be at a disadvantage in such company. His cold advocate's manner would not encourage such gallant exchanges. Also, these men, with whom he was to do battle for Pakistan, were younger. Lord Mountbatten was 46, and Pandit Nehru, who spoke for Congress in place of the aged Mahatma, secure in his refuge of mysticism, was 57. Jinnah was 70, already an old man, and slowly dying. But his single mindedness and persistent integrity still sustained him, so that, in the end, he was able to enjoy considerable victory over his adversaries, both British and Hindu. As the story of these last months of grinding argument unfolds, it must be remembered that even before Lord Mountbatten left England, he had little hope of reconciling Hindus and Muslims within a united India. His initial instruction from the cabinet and his own aim was to establish something like the cabinet mission plan. Congress might have agreed to this, but the viceroy arrived at New Delhi already aware that the Qaid would fight all attempts to deprive him of Pakistan. During his first talk with Pandit Nehru, Lord Mountbatten asked the Congress leader for his personal estimate of Jinnah. The Viceroy's press attached, Mr. Allen Campbell Johnson, recorded the episode. Pandit Nehru answered that the essential thing to realize was that success came to Jinnah very late in life, when he was over 60. Then he said, before that he had not been a major figure in Indian politics. He was a successful lawyer, but not an especially good one. The secret of his success, and it had been tremendous, if only for its emotional intensity, was in his capacity to take up a permanently negative attitude. Nehru said that Jinnah had done this with complete singleness of purpose. Since 1935, the year when he gave up the seclusion of Hampstead and returned to India, Pandit Nehru claimed to Lord Mountbatten that Jinnah knew that Pakistan could never stand up to constructive criticism and that he had ensured that it should never be subjected to it. Lord Mountbatten may have sought the Qaid's opinion of Pandit Nehru, but there is no record of such a talk between them. When Jinnah called on the viceroy the first time, the journalist who intercepted him thought him formal and reserved. This was a solemn hour in his case for Pakistan, and he had prepared his arguments well. Having shaken hands with Lord Mountbatten, he began, I will enter into discussion on one condition only. The Viceroy trod more softly. He interrupted. Mr. Jinnah, I am not prepared to discuss conditions or indeed the present situation until I have had the chance of making your acquaintance and hearing more about you yourself. Mr. Campbell Johnson records that Jinnah was completely taken aback and that he did not respond but remained reserved, haughty, and aloof. In the end, his mood softened and he duly succumbed to Mountbatten's desire to hear him recount the story of the Muslim League's rise to power in terms of his own career. At the close of the talk, Lord Mountbatten felt he could not sustain another session with Jinnah that day. My God, he was cold, said the Viceroy. It took most of the interview to unfreeze him. Next evening, when Qaid-e-Azam and his sister dined with the Viceroy, the conversation was crisp rather than warm. Mr. Jinnah harped on Muslim massacres and described the horrors at length. He spoke of the need for a quick decision and added that it would have to be a surgical operation. Lord Mountbatten answered that an anesthetic would be required. Before he departed, Jinnah made a last pathetic protest. He said to the Viceroy, the Congress want to inherit everything. They would even accept dominion status to deprive me of Pakistan. Qaid-e-Azam returned home, as he was to return from so many meetings in the future, feeling that he had made little access to Lord Mountbatten's heart. His only complaint to his secretary was, the Viceroy does not understand. The legend of antipathy between the Viceroy and Mr. Jinnah became dangerous in its effect, especially after partition, when they were Governor General of the new opposed states. 2 months after the country was divided, Mr. Ian Stephens, editor of the Statesman, dined with the Mountbattens and was startled by their one sided verdicts on affairs. This was in October 1947 when the developing drama in Kashmir was moving towards the Maharaja's accession to India. Mr. Stephens wrote that Lord and Lady Mountbatten seemed to have become wholly pro Hindu. The atmosphere at Government House that night was almost one of war. Pakistan, the Muslim League, and Mr. Jinnah were the enemy. Perhaps these one sided verdicts were more political and less personal than contemporary observers realized. Lord Mountbatten often spoke to members of his staff of Jinnah's strong sense of leadership, his single mindedness of purpose, and of his standing head and shoulders above all other members of the Muslim League. And there is the alleviating story of the Viceroy turning to his press attaché one day after a long session with the Qaid and saying, you know, I like the old boy really. Lord Mountbatten was not intimidated by Rudyard Kipling's warning that it is not good for the Christian's health to hustle the Aryan brown. He tried to hustle the East and he succeeded. Mr. Wilfred Russell, a businessman in India, wrote, in Delhi, the last viceroy was working with a speed and determination which fascinated and to some extent terrified both the Indian leaders and the British officials. Beyond these hurried scenes of conferences and reports, the form of the new India was rising, like a group of islands from the sea. That the islands were volcanic and in eruption could not be prevented by these dividers of the earth at their desks in Delhi. While they were deliberating, slaughter spread, frantic and vicious, in almost every part of northern India. The traveller cannot pass through Pakistan or India without being aware of the ghost of this carnage. Before the story of so much death, the living hold their breath. Mr. Richard Simmons has described the desperate situation that Lord Mountbatten had to endure and try to control. In the Punjab, a unionist government tottering under the attack of the Muslim League. In the northwest frontier, a Muslim League civil disobedience campaign. And all over the country, fierce communal clashes. While private armies formed for the final struggle for power, the civil service were bitterly divided by communalism and headed by dispirited Englishmen, anxious to retire. The British troops were already being repatriated, and the morale of the Indian army was uncertain. General Lord Ismail, chief of the Viceroy's staff, had known the old India, first as a soldier 40 years before, and later as military secretary to the Viceroy in Lord Wellington's time. He has spoken of the changes that had come, of the awakening of nationalism, and the social hatred that had multiplied, so tragically, during the 5 years of wrangling since the Cripps mission. The communal feeling I found, I just did not believe possible. It tore at you all the time. There was slaughter everywhere. We British had all the responsibility and none of the power. The police force was already undermined, and the civil service were frustrated and madly anxious. They were blamed by both Nehru and Jinnah for everything that went wrong. This was one reason why to delay partition would be to increase the disasters. There was another reason. The Viceroy's Executive Council, which had been composed of 6 or 8 wise men, had disappeared. We had instead a cabinet of 9 Congress leaders and 5 Muslim League leaders who could agree on only one thought, that the British should quit India. Lord Ismay has said, it was obvious that June 1948, instead of being too early for the transfer of power, would be too late. It would not be possible to achieve an orderly handover to a government that barely existed, a civil service torn by internal strife, and many millions of people intent on killing each other. The perils were inevitable. With delay, they would only increase. On the one hand was Pandit Nehru, who said to the Viceroy, this cannot go on. If you do not produce a plan, I shall resign. On the other hand was the Qaid, with his simple, inviolate demand for Pakistan. Lord Ismay reminded him, on behalf of the Viceroy, that if India was to be divided, Bengal and the Punjab would also have to be split in two, according to the will of the people. Jinnah's answer was, better a moth eaten Pakistan than that no Pakistan at all. By 14 April, the riots and cruelties were so terrible that Lord Mountbatten induced the Qaid and the Mahatma to agree in the last concerted action of their lives. They signed a peace appeal, drawn up by the Viceroy, to be printed and broadcast and shown in cinemas throughout India. The appeal was particularly aimed at the Punjab, where Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims were attacking each other so violently that the governor had been obliged to take over the administration, and at the northwest frontier, where the rising strength of the Muslim League had led to open revolt against the Congress ministry, where, as Mr. Wilfield Russell wrote, the vote catching power of Congress money was fast melting before the fires of Islam. The time for peace appeals had passed. In the Punjab, Master Tara Singh, the Sikh insurgent leader, was inciting his followers to destroy the Muslims and form their own state. The plan, organized with officers, arms, ammunition, and vehicles, was reported to Jinnah. The Muslims begged him to release funds and approve the formation of a volunteer corps to fight the Sikhs. His answer was in harmony with his long story of honest dealing. He said, how can you expect me to approve of such a scheme? I am not a hypocrite. I have just signed the peace appeal, and I expect the Muslims to observe the spirit of the appeal. Jinnah's secretary, who worked with him in Delhi at this time, has said he would return from his meetings with the Viceroy solemn and weary, but he would not discuss what had happened during the day, not with me or other members of the staff. He would work late over his papers, tense and silent. Towards the end of April, the hatred and cruelty that raged throughout India forced the Viceroy to admit the folly of further acrimonious negotiation. There were but two alternatives: to send troops out from Britain and resume imperial control of India, or to hasten withdrawal. After more than 5 years of important conferences, most of the British officials and army officers were disillusioned and only wished to return home. And the Indians themselves were for final settlement, at any price. To reinstate the old Raj in India, with the support of an army, would be an impossible act. Lord Mountbatten realized the frightening necessity of immediate partition and complete withdrawal as soon as possible. With the help of his advisers, he drafted the first form of what came to be known as the Plan, which was to end British rule in India. On 23rd April, the Viceroy had a 3 hour session with Jinnah, who was friendly. Mr. Campbell Johnson wrote in his diary of the Qaib, sometimes he is deliberately rude, but today his mood was to be accommodating. He seemed to be resigned to the partition of the Punjab and Bengal. He did not ask what the boundaries would be, and Mountbatten did not tell him. He told Mountbatten frankly, Your Excellency, the Hindus are impossible. They always want 17 annas for the rupee. From this time, The plan grew quickly, and on 26 April, Lord Mountbatten decided that Lord Ismay and Mr. George Abel should fly to London with the first draft and hammer it out clause by clause with the government. During Lord Ismay's absence, Jinnah and Gandhi met by accident for the first time in 3 years. They both had appointments with the Viceroy, and by a freak of chance, the interviews overlapped. Lord Mountbatten used the brief encounter well. He brought them together in amiable conversation, which ended with the two leaders deciding to meet again privately and talk over their problems. This last conference between the old warriors at Jinnah's bungalow in Delhi was more picturesque than useful. Neither of them would budge from his convictions, and the hour passed with futile discussion, warmed by mutual cordiality. The excitement and solemnity of these days and events is intensified by observing the time passed and the distances travelled by these last officials of the British Raj. Aircraft flew back and forth between Delhi and London, covering in little more than a day the journey Clive had made in many months. Within 145 days, the Viceroy and his staff succeeded in relinquishing the continent their forebears had held and nurtured for 200 years. Lord Ismay had left Delhi on 2nd May. 2 days later, he arrived in London, where he remained until the end of the month. During the first week of his visit, the plan was revised and approved by the British government. And on 10 May, Mr. Campbell Johnson put out the momentous communique announcing that the Viceroy had invited the League, Congress, and Sikh leaders and the representatives of the Indian states to meet him on 17 May, when he would present to them the plan, which His Majesty's government had now made for the transfer of power to Indian hands. The Viceroy sent Sir Eric Neville to Mr. Jinnah with a copy of the plan. He also gave a copy to Pandit Nehru, who was his guest at the time. This led to an impasse. Nehru vehemently refused to accept some of the terms, and the momentous communique had to be withdrawn. Lord Mountbatten then sent a telegram to Lord Ismay announcing that more changes would be necessary in the plan. This alarming pattern of negotiation involving Whitehall and New Delhi, aircraft and telegraph, ended with a summons to the Viceroy, courteous but firm, that he should return to London for consultation. Lord Mountbatten arrived in England on 19 May. 12 days later, on Saturday 31st May. He returned to New Delhi with Lord Ismay carrying the final irrevocable plan approved by the British Cabinet. There were to be no more conferences, no more acrid exchanges, or flights of delegates to and fro. The Viceroy summoned the leaders to meet him on Monday morning, when he would announce the absolute decision that India was to be divided. Muhammad Ali Jinnah would have most of the prize he had fought for, and Pakistan and Hindustan would go their separate ways with full dominion status and the right to secede from the Commonwealth if they choose. The day for the final cleavage was to be only 3 months away, 15 August 1947, almost a year earlier than Mr. Attlee had planned when he entrusted the last Viceroy with his task. From this date also, the princely Indian states would no longer owe allegiance to the British Crown. They would be free to keep their independence or to accede to either of the new dominions as they choose. Jinnah had to pay for his victory. Within the greater scheme of partition was to be the lesser slicing he had always feared. The provinces of Bengal and the Punjab were also to be divided. The right of the Muslim majority areas to accept or reject federation with the new state of Pakistan was to be decided by the free will of the people, voting, in the case of West Punjab, East Bengal, and Sindh, through their elected representatives in the provincial assemblies; in Balochistan, through the Shahi Jirga, the Council of Chiefs; and in the northwest frontier province and Sylhet, the Muslim majority area of Assam, by the general vote of the people themselves through their adult male population. The meeting on 2nd June lasted 2 hours. Mr. Campbell Johnson described the mood of the leaders after they had read their copies of the plan. Pandit Nehru said that while there could never be complete approval by Congress, on balance they accepted it. The Qaid was reluctant to commit himself. He said that he would need to go to the working committee of the Muslim League and to the people for a final decision, not with any intent of wrecking the plan, but with the sincerest desire to persuade them to accept it. He assured the viceroy that he would do his best. Lord Mountbatten once more tried to hustle the East and succeeded. He asked that the reactions of Congress, the League, and the Sikhs should be declared to him by midnight, and by midnight the leaders answered him. Jinnah came in person, but the way was not easy. Mr. Campbell Johnson recorded that no amount of pressure from the viceroy could make the Qaid agree to firm acceptance without the consent of the League. Nothing Mountbatten could say would move him. With his peculiar care, reminiscent of the early days of argument before the judges in the Bombay law courts, Jinnah insisted that he was not constitutionally authorized to make a decision without the concurrence of the full Muslim League Council. Lord Mountbatten then said, "If that is your attitude, then the leaders of the Congress party and Sikhs will refuse final acceptance at the meeting in the morning. Chaos will follow, and you will lose your Pakistan, probably for good." The Kite shrugged his shoulders and answered, "What must be, must be." The Viceroy made his last appeal. "Mr. Jinnah, I do not intend to let you wreck all the work that has gone into this settlement. Since you will not accept for the Muslim League, I will speak for them myself. I will take the risk of saying that I am satisfied with the assurances you have given me, and if your council fails to ratify the agreement, you can put the blame on me." Lord Mountbatten made one condition. He asked that when at the next morning session he would say, "Mr. Jinnah has given me assurance which I have accepted and which satisfy me. The Caid should in no circumstances contradict, and that when the Viceroy looked towards him, he should nod his head in acquiescence." Cadism agreed, and Lord Mountbatten asked his last question. Did Jinnah consider that the Viceroy would be justified in advising Mr. Attlee to go ahead and make his announcement in the British Parliament? Jinnah answered yes. The meeting next morning began with some bitter remarks from the leaders before the discussion moved into calmer water. Qaid-e-Azam revealed all the history of his mind in 2 episodes during this last talk at the Oval Table over which the grim decisions had been made. Mr. Campbell Johnson recalls the moment when Lord Mountbatten presented the leaders with a formidable document entitled The Administrative Consequences of Partition. He suggested that they should consider it first, before it was submitted to a cabinet meeting, a slip of the tongue, as the Viceroy had meant to say. Interim government, Jinnah remonstrated, thinking that Mountbatten was referring to the British cabinet. When the error was explained, Jinnah, so meticulous in the use of words, said, "A spade should be called a spade," and remarked that his mind always worked on constitutional lines. The second episode was towards the end, when the Qaid spoke of his policy for Pakistan, the vigor of his aspirations and his passion for justice, above racial fears and the disease of creeds, were disclosed as he declared stoutly that in Pakistan it would be his intention to observe no communal differences. All who lived in the state he created would be, he said, fully fleshed citizens. The old ambassador of Hindu Muslim unity had died hard in the advocate for Muslim freedom.